presenter is Rachel Rich. Today's program presenter is Rachel Richer. She is an urban wildlife biologist for the Texas Parks and Wildlife in the DFW area. She has a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fishery science from Texas A&M. She also has a master's degree in wildlife ecology from Texas State. As an urban wildlife biologist, she focuses on making our communities more wildlife friendly through educational outreach while providing technical guidance. Today, she will go into detail about the many North Texas bats that we could encounter in DFW. Rachel, take it away.
All right, thank you everyone for choosing to spend part of your Saturday on this. Oh, I think you need to give me permission to share my screen. Okay, perfect. As Courtney said, my name is Rachel Richter. I'm an urban wildlife biologist here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Are y'all seeing the full PowerPoint slide right now, or are y'all seeing the presenter mode? Just want to make sure. Sometimes it likes to mix it up.
It's the presentation mode.
So do you see the full screen? You don't see like the next slide or anything like that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I am going to turn my video off just because my internet tends to work better that way, but I wanted y'all to know that I do have a face. I'll turn it back on at the end, just so that way we're more likely to get through without any issues here. Okay, so we are obviously here today to talk about bats. And bats are a great thing to talk about because they're really, really interesting, and there's just a lot of cool things going on with bats. Bats are also one of those species that can be a little bit controversial. Not everyone loves bats because there's a lot of kind of myths and superstitions out there about bats that just really aren't true. So there are some people out there who don't like bats, but I think that this is really changing and people are starting to see the benefits of bats. So one common thing that we hear is bats are flying mice. Bats, you know, they may be small, furry mammals, and some of them have tails, but they're not anywhere closely related to mice. They're actually more closely related to people genetically than mice. And they're in their own unique group of mammals that we'll talk about in just a second. Another thing that you've probably heard is that bats are blind. Bats are actually not blind. They can see just about as well as other mammals do, but I think that this kind of stems from them coming out at night, and then also that really cool ability of echolocation that they have. But turns out they can echolocate and they can see. Another thing is a lot of people think that bats are going to kind of like fly up and get tangled in your hair. You see that a lot, especially if you think about like old movies or cartoons where like bats come and they're like chasing a person. Bats are not aggressive at all. Like they're much smaller than we are. So the same way we wouldn't go up and attack like a grizzly bear that's much larger than us, a bat is not going to come up and attack us. It can't eat us, so there's not really a point. And they also can see and they can echolocate, so they're pretty good at avoiding people. I really hope that this will not come as a shock to anyone on this call, but bats are also not vampires. Maybe some kids think that, but we do have a few species of bats that are not found in the US that do eat blood. So we do have some vampire bats, but they're not going to like turn into Dracula at night or anything like that. Another thing that we hear commonly is that all bats have rabies. Rabies does exist in bats. Like bats are just kind of a natural reservoir for the rabies virus, but less than half of 1% of bats actually have the rabies virus. So it's very rare. However, if you see a sick bat, so if you see a bat that is alone and it's on the wall, like, maybe on a wall or ground, and it seems lethargic or isn't moving around, right? Stay away from that bat. Never touch a sick bat, because that is kind of an indication that it might, it's sick with something and it could potentially be rabies. But rabies is really pretty rare in bats overall. So bats are in the order of mammals called Chiroptera, and Chiroptera translates to mean hand wing. And if you look at the skeleton of the bat, you can see where that comes from, right? They've got a thumb, and then they have 4 very elongated fingers, and that is what the skin that makes up their wings stretches over. And you look at the skeleton, it kind of looks human-like in some ways, with the shoulders and the hands. The fingers are much longer and the arms are much longer. And then if you look at their legs, their knees are kind of in that 90-degree angle, go out straight, and they're kind of rotated around, which is an adaptation that allows them to grip and hang. So bats are found just about everywhere in the world. Being able to fly means that you're pretty good at dispersing. So they're found just about everywhere except for extreme deserts and the poles where it gets very cold. There are about 1,300 kinds of bats found worldwide. And Indonesia is the country that has the most bats, with 219 documented bat species. And here in the United States, you see we're kind of blue on this map, so we're not really a bat biodiversity hotspot. But we do have 43 bat species in the US, and 32 of those species are found in Texas. So we have more bat species than any other state here in Texas. So bats are second only to rodents in terms of species diversity within mammals. So 1 in every 4 or 5 mammal species is a bat. They're also the only mammals that are capable of true powered sustained flight. We do have some other mammals like flying squirrels and sugar gliders that have kind of flaps of skin that they can extend, like they'll stick their arms out and they use that to glide. But bats are the only ones that can really sustain flight for a long period of time. And bats have some kind of like interesting life history traits, because bats are relatively small, and typically we associate being small with having a lot of babies and having a relatively short lifespan, and that's not true for bats. So most bat species only give birth to 1 pup per year. There are some exceptions to that, but most only give birth to 1 pup per year. Part of the reason for that is the pups are pretty big when they're born. They're about 1/3 of their mother's body weight at birth. And so you can think about that like relative to a human, that's like giving birth to a 30, 40, 50-pound newborn, which is pretty terrifying to me anyway. The baby bats are also altricial, which means that they are reliant on their mom for the first couple of months of life. So there's kind of two ways that we can describe young altricial and precocial. Precocial young basically can get up and start running and take care of themselves right away. Altricial young need a lot of investment and upbringing from their parents. So they're kind of born, blind, hairless, and helpless. And so that's where bats are. Bats also can live for a really long time. We've got several species in our area that might live 10 to 12 years, which again is kind of long for something that's so small. There was one bat in Europe that was captured and tagged as part of a research project. And that bat was recaptured every year for 41 years. So that's the longest documented living bat, which is pretty long lifespan there. So bats also, they're a pretty diverse group. The smallest bat species in the world is the Kitti's hognose bat, which is found in Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And this bat weighs less than a penny. And I know you can't see me and I can't see you right now, but take your hand and try and hold it up like you see in that picture, and picture a bat just resting on your third finger there, right? That is a really tiny little bat. On the other end of that scale, we have the flying fox, which is the world's largest bat. It's located in the Indo-Pacific, and it's a fruit bat, and it has a 6-foot wingspan, which is pretty impressive. Bats have a really cool ability known as echolocation, which is basically they emit a high-pitched sound that reflects off of objects and it bounces back, and based on the way that it bounces back, it's kind of they can use the way that the sound bounces back into their ears to basically see where things are, to navigate the world around them and also find food. Bats eat a lot of different types of food. There are, probably the most famous type of bat is fruit bats. So fruit-eating bats eat pretty much exclusively fruit. They are not found in the US, but where they are found, they're really important seed dispersers because they travel long distances in small groups to look for food. And so, they might hang out in one place for a while, eat a whole bunch of figs, and then all the figs are gone, so they fly somewhere else. But in the meantime, they digest those seeds and they poop them out in a nice little package of fertilizer. And so that can help new fruit trees grow. There are also flower feeding bats. These are bats that eat nectar and pollen. They typically have a long pointed head and a long tongue, so they're adapted to really kind of work into narrow plants and extract the food that they need. And as they move from flower to flower, they bring pollen to different flowers to help kind of fertilize those flowers, to pollinate the flowers. We do have 2 species of flower feeding bats here in Texas. And they both are kind of in, well, one's in the Rio Grande and one is in the Big Bend region. And then we have our blood-eating bats. So these are our vampire bats. There are 3 species. They're all found in Latin America, none in the US, although you might get an occasional sighting of them in far South Texas. They eat only blood. And what they do is they prey on animals that are sleeping. They usually tend to focus on livestock. And what they do is they have highly modified front incisors that are very sharp and very like razor blade like. And so they'll just cut a little, make a little kind of like a paper cut almost into the skin of the animal. And then they lick they lick up the blood as it comes out. And they actually have an anticoagulant in their saliva. So that when they're licking, it encourages the blood to keep flowing. And they've been known to eat so much that they can't fly away afterwards. So they tend to have pretty well-developed hind legs to help them like get away in the event that they overindulge. Also, blood is apparently pretty low in terms of nutrition value. So vampire bats have to eat a lot, like very frequently. And if they go more than like, I think it's 1 or 2 days without eating, then they'll actually starve. They So they are small mammals, birds, lizards, and frogs. These bats have very strong jaws and sharp teeth. They also tend to have, you can see here, right, big mouth for a bat, big strong mouth, and then also big claws. There are some, we don't have any of these species in the US, but there are some species of bats that specialize on eating frogs. And these bats have learned how to distinguish the calls of poisonous frogs from non-poisonous frogs. So they don't eat the poisonous frogs and make themselves sick. Fish-eating bats, again, not found in the US, but these are bats that specialize in eating fish. They typically have very large, powerful feet. You can see the claws here that they use for capturing fish that are at or near the water surface. They also tend to have a highly developed uropatagium. And the uropatagium is the skin between the legs of the bat. And so they'll kind of use their legs and the skin in between to kind of scoop the fish out if they need to. These bats have very highly developed echolocation, and they can actually detect ripples made by fish swimming on the surface or near the surface of the water. So like if a fish's fin kind of breaks the surface of the water and causes a ripple, these bats can detect that movement of the water with their echolocation, which is really pretty impressive. And finally, the majority of all of our bats are insectivorous bats. So these are bats that eat insects and other bugs. And these are super important for controlling agricultural pests, and also just for keeping us not completely surrounded in bugs all of the time. And we'll talk more about the benefits of that later. So bats live in a variety of places, including bridges, like the Congress Avenue Bridge here in Austin. They also live in caves, cliff crevices, and abandoned mines. These are the places that I think we most traditionally associate with bats roosting. They also live in trees, and so several of our bat species here in North Texas are primarily tree roosters, and they can utilize several different parts of the tree. So some of them prefer hollow trees or standing dead trees, which we call snags. And so they'll roost in the cavities of those trees. Some of them will just roost in among the leaves on the foliage, and And some of them will roost underneath the bark of a tree that may be kind of peeling up. And some bats will also roost in man-made structures like abandoned buildings, some of them will also take advantage of, bat houses that are specifically designed for bats to roost in. There are also different types of roosts for bats. So the day roost is what we think of most often. This is where bats sleep. So this is somewhere where they feel warm and protected. So this would be that cave, the bat house, that tree. Night roosts are temporary roosts. So they're flying around, they're having a good time, they're eating a lot of insects. They need a break for a little bit to kind of chill out and digest. So they'll find a temporary place to perch, to rest for a little while before they go back out to forage some more. Maternity roosts are typically going to be used May through August. And so some species of bats form maternity colonies, and most of the really large colonies of bats that we have are maternity colonies, which means that it's the mother bats and their pups. So these are typically going to be very high temperatures to keep those baby bats warm, to keep the pups warm. And some of them are used only in the summer months, and some of them might be used year round. And then we have bachelor roosts. So the males do not help with raising the pups. So in those species that are colonial, they the males will go off and form their own colony of bachelor roosts that tend to be a little bit smaller in size than the maternity roosts, and then they'll join back up together with the females and the grown pups at the end of the summer, potentially before they migrate, depending on the species. So most bats, as I said, give birth to one pup per year starting in May. This is an example of kind of what a maternity roost looks like. So if you look at this picture, there is only one mother bat. There's only one adult bat in this picture. All the rest are pups. And among that, if you picture a cave and you've got millions of bat pups clinging to the surface of this cave, that mother bat will find her one pup among that sea of baby bat pups. And that is the only bat pup that she will care and feed for. So you see she's kind of got one tucked in between her wings here. That's her baby. That's the only one that she's going to take care of. So because bats, are pretty sensitive during this time, these pups, you can look at them, they don't have any hair yet, they're not capable of flying. It's very important to not exclude bats from buildings during the maternity season, which is the end of May to August. After the end of August, the pups can fly by themselves, and they're going to start moving on to other places. Bats do not like the cold. They don't have a whole lot of great physiological adaptations to deal with the cold. So they have to deal with it in other ways. So they'll typically migrate, go into torpor, or hibernation. About 50% of bats will actually hibernate. 50% of bat species will hibernate. And so hibernation is basically the process of slowing down your metabolism and going into a deep sleep, right? Torpor is very similar to hibernation, but you don't slow down your body processes quite as much. And so torpor, it doesn't save you as much energy, but you're also able to come out of it sooner. So if you live somewhere where the weather is only occasionally really bad, you know, like say North Texas, where we might have times where it's 75 degrees in December. It's advantageous to have that ability to come out of your resting state to feed, but then you also can conserve energy during the day by lowering your body temperature a little bit. And then some bats will migrate. So they just, like birds, they just fly somewhere else where the weather is a little bit more to their liking. And some bats will even fly south and then hibernate or go or have torpor once they get there. So I mentioned earlier, there are 47 bat species in the United States, 32 of which are found in Texas. And we have about 8 species in the DFW area. I say about because you might get some that are here occasionally, but don't spend a whole lot of time here. The most diverse place for bats within the state of Texas is in the Trans-Pecos region out west. So here in Texas, we do have one bat species that is listed as endangered at the federal level, and that is the Mexican long-nosed bat. It's a little bit tricky to see here, but so you can see this bat is the majority of its range is in Mexico, but it does cross into the Big Bend region a little bit. And this bat, this is one of our flower feeding bats. And so this one actually specializes on the nectar and pollen of agave plants. So if you enjoy margaritas or anything that has tequila in it, you can bake this bat species. It pollinates the agave flowers in the summer. And so they time their arrival with the blooming of the agave plants. And they can also feed on some cacti species as well. And they've been known to hang out, take advantage of hummingbird feeders at night too. We also have a couple of bats that are listed as threatened at the state level here in Texas. One is the southern yellow bat, which you see here. This one's found in the Rio Grande Valley, and it roosts in dead palm fronds. So you see these palm trees here, and that's the roosting habitat for this bat. One of the things that has really hurt it is our landscaping practices of going in and removing those dead palm fronds. So one thing that we can do to help this bat is leave the palm fronds in place. This is the spotted bat, which I think is just one of the cutest bats out there. There's not really a whole lot known about this species, and it's only known in the Big Bend region in Texas. So it's just kind of elusive. And another state threatened bat is the Raffenest big-eared bat. You can see why it gets its name. It has these very cute, very large ears. And it's found in the southeastern United States and East Texas. And this is the roosting habitat. It likes kind of swampy areas with big trees, and it roosts in the hollow cavities of trees. And so it needs like a really large roost, kind of large open roost. And so people can make these artificial roost towers for it to help benefit it. So getting now into some of the species that we have here in DFW. The one that is first up is the hoary bat. So it gets its name from the coloration of its fur. How you see out here, the way it changes colors from going like silver at the tip to kind of brown to like more yellow towards the base. As you can see on the map, it's one of the most widely distributed bat species in North America, and they're known for migrating very large distances. So they're very good at extended flying. And these, this bat, there's actually a species of hoary bat that is found in Hawaii. So at some point, ancestors of it flew all the way to Hawaii from North America. And that's the only mammal species that is native to the Hawaiian Islands. Let's see, these bats have also been documented to eat mosquitoes. Not a lot of bat species eat as much mosquitoes as we wish that they would. And I kind of hate to say that a little bit because everyone wants bats around because they eat mosquitoes. But if you think about it, if you had the choice, if you've got two bugs to chase after, are you going to chase after that big, fat, juicy moth or that teeny tiny little mosquito, right? The bigger bugs are generally going to be more beneficial. There's, a greater benefit for the effort that you put into it. While they might occasionally snack on them, a lot of our bat species don't eat a ton of mosquitoes, but hoary bats are ones that actually have been documented to eat quite a bit of mosquitoes. This is the silver-haired bat. You can see it gets its name from the little kind of silver hairs on its body. This is a fall-spring migrant. They are generally solitary, so they don't live in colonies or anything like that. It's typically just a mom and her pups. But they might also form some small nursery colonies as well. They're relatively slow flyers. They spend the warmer months in the northern third of the US and Canada. And during the winter, they migrate to more mild climates. These are, again, kind of tree. So they'll roost in trees or rock crevices or bridges, but they're typically not going to use bat houses or buildings, and they can live up to 12 years. This is the eastern red bat. This bat roosts in foliage, so it roosts along leaves. And if you look at it, that red color might seem like it's not very good camouflage, but it sure looks a lot like a dead leaf. And so that's the kind of reasoning, the benefit of that coloration that they have there. So they, excuse me. So eastern red bats, they eat a lot of moths. They also eat beetles, and they typically, they're kind of that exception to the normal one pup per rule, per one pup at a time rule. They can have up to 5 pups born at once. Typically, though, it's more likely to be 3. And they also keep their pups with them. So they might, especially if there's bad weather, they tend to try to find a more stable, secure location than the leaves of a tree. And so they'll take their pups and carry them. The mother will fly with her pups attached to her to find a more secure location. And so sometimes you might see these bats hanging out, on the ground and looking exhausted. If they have babies with them, that's not an indication that they're sick. They're just exhausted from carrying 3 times their body weight. So she's a busy mom. The tricolored bat. This is the smallest bat species that we have here in North Texas. And this is also, so they roost in a variety of places. And this is one of the species in our area that actually will use bat houses occasionally. Because they are so small, they actually do eat a lot of mosquitoes, and they also have a very voracious appetite. They can catch one insect every 2 seconds and increase their body weight by 25% in just 30 minutes, which is pretty impressive. So they eat a lot. And they typically have twins, and they can live for up to 14 years. And those twins that they have are about 50% of the mom's body weight at birth, which is just insane again. So this bat is known as the evening bat. It is primarily a tree rooster, but this is another one that can live in bat houses. And they also do live in small colonies of usually around 30 bats or so. And they prefer to forage on edge habitats, and they eat primarily beetles. And this is the Mexican free-tailed bat. This bat is our state flying mammal. You probably didn't know that Texas had a state flying mammal, but now you do. And it is the Mexican free-tailed bat, sometimes called the Brazilian free-tailed bat. And these guys are really expert flyers. They have been documented to fly at speeds of over 60 miles per hour, and they can reach up to 10,000 feet in elevation. So they fly fast and they fly high. They will roost in a wide variety of locations as well. They don't really roost in trees very often, but they'll roost in caves, mines, bridges. They will also use bat houses, and they only have one pup per year, and they are really known for forming large colonies, especially maternity colonies. As an example of that, this is Bracken Cave, which is near San Antonio. Bracken Cave is the largest colony of mammals in the world. It's estimated that there are over 20 million bats that call Bracken Cave home. The majority of them are Mexican free-tailed bats, but there are some other species that are found there as well. And this is a maternity colony. So this colony is pups and their mothers. And if you couldn't tell, all of that darkness that you see on the roof of this cave, that's all bats. These kind of areas where it's lighter, that's where there are not bats. Everywhere else is covered with bats. So these bats, also they can eat 250 tons of insects around San Antonio every single night that they emerge. And there's so many of them that you can actually see them on Doppler radar. And so this is just a picture of a Doppler image, and you can see the bats emerging from Bracken Cave, as well as a few other caves in the area. Bats are also, they're really beneficial to the hill country. It's estimated that there's over 100 million Mexican free-tailed bats in the hill country, and each million bats can eat 10 tons of insects every single night. There was a study done, I think in 2006, so it's been a while, where they looked at 8 counties in South Central Texas, and they estimated that the Mexican free-tailed bats in that area have an annual value of up to $1 million to the farmers in just those 8 counties. So Mexican free-tailed bats, they eat a lot of moths. This caterpillar that you see right here is the corn earworm moth, and it's one of the worst agricultural pests out there, and these bats just really love to eat them. This is Waugh Drive Bridge, which is over Buffalo Bayou in Houston. So this is very similar to the Congress Avenue Bridge colony, but it's a little bit smaller. This bridge is estimated to be the home of about 300,000 bats that consume 2.5 to 3 tons of insects every night over Houston. And there's approximately 20,000 visitors to this bridge every year. That brings in about $250,000 to Houston in tourism dollars. Which, it's free to go and see the bats, but they might, these people might get a hotel room, they might also have dinner nearby, so it really generates stimulates the economy there. And so this is what it looks like when bats are roosting in a bridge. So the bridges have these kind of long slabs of concrete with little holes in between. And the bats like it because, as we talked about earlier, bats don't like the cold, and concrete is really, really good at retaining heat. So the bridge is nice and warm, and the bats get in there, and they feel safe and sheltered. And here's kind of a closer up picture where you can see the little bats. Aren't they cute? They look like, this one right here especially looks like he's just smiling at the camera. So what are the threats to bats? Well, the biggest one is really habitat loss and deforestation. And this is a threat to not just bats, but lots of other wildlife as well. If they don't have their habitat to get the food, water, and shelter and space that they need in order to survive, then they're not going to be able to persist in that area. Disturbance of roosts, as well as people not liking bats and intentional killing of bats can be a problem as well. Pesticides can also impact bats. We have to be mindful of how we're using pesticides, because if we just completely obliterate bugs, then we're also going to wipe out all of the things that need bugs in order to survive, which is a lot of things. Excuse me. White nose syndrome is a fungal disease that is also a very significant threat to bats, and we'll talk more about that. So white nose syndrome is a disease that is caused by a cold-loving fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or more commonly called PV. We don't know for sure, but we believe that it originated in Western Europe, and it was first discovered in a cave in 2006 in New York. And this fungus impacts bats that are hibernating, and it has a 95 to 100% mortality rate. A study that was done in 2011 estimated that over 6 million bats had been killed. And keep in mind, it was discovered in 2006, or that's when it was first noted. That's when they believe it got here, was in 2006. So in just 6 years, over 6 million, in just 5 years, over 6 million bats were killed by white nose syndrome. Obviously, 2011 was a while ago, so it has certainly killed more bats since then, but that's the most recent estimate that we have, because estimates of this type of thing can be difficult to make. It's also estimated that there are about 80% of the bats in the northeastern United States are gone. And this has the potential to cause regional extinction of species. So what's going on? Well, white nose syndrome. So it is most impactful on small bats that hibernate in wet, humid, cold caves. It likes that kind of cold, humid environment to grow. And so when bats hibernate, you slow down all of the processes of your body, you slow down your metabolism, and as a result of that, your immune system is also suppressed. And when the immune system is suppressed and the bats have been exposed to this fungus, it allows the fungus to colonize on the bat's skin. And so bats are very clean animals. They clean themselves a lot. And they feel the fungus growing on them, it might be itchy. And so it wakes them up out of their hibernation, and they try to clean the fungus off of them. And, they're also probably just waking up because it's uncomfortable. And that causes them to burn through the fat stores that they need to survive the winter. So they're expending more energy than they can in order than they can if they want to survive the winter. And so the fungus can also eat holes in their wings and things like that. So the bats might starve to death in the cave, or they can go out and try and look for bugs. But if it's too cold for bugs to be active, then they're exposing themselves to the cold and burning more energy. And so that might cause them to die as well. So it's really, really unfortunate. It also can trigger an inflammatory response from the immune system, which is basically their immune system goes into overdrive and starts attacking healthy cells as well as the cells that have been infected. So it impacts many species in North America. These are the 3 species that are most impacted. You'll notice the tricolored bat, which is one that we have here in North Texas, is one of the ones that is most sensitive to it. And some of these species are either already listed as threatened or endangered or are being proposed for listing. So these are species that are affected by it, but they're not quite as sensitive as some of the others. And then interestingly, there are also some bat species where the fungus that causes white nose syndrome has been documented on the bats, but the bats have not been documented as having that, as having the white nose syndrome actually. So the fungus is there, but it's not colonizing on their body. And so just to kind of give you all a reminder of what this looks like, it gets the name white nose syndrome because it typically will kind of grow on their nose as well as the wings. So they might have the fungus present, but it's not going to look like this. So it'd be kind of more present at like a microscopic level. So where is white nose syndrome? Unfortunately, it has spread very rapidly. The big X is where it was originally found in 2006. And then, so the cooler colors are earlier detections and the warmer colors are the more recent detections. For a while, there was a hope that it wouldn't really make it into the Western United States because there's just not a lot of caves in this area. But unfortunately, it has spread. And it was found for the first time in Texas, in the Panhandle in 2017. Texas Parks and Wildlife had been monitoring for several years, I think since 2011, for the occurrence of white nose syndrome. But it wasn't found until about 2017. So it has been present in Texas for several years now. To my knowledge, there has not been a large die-off in Texas, even though it is present in a lot of the caves that we have in the Panhandle in Central Texas. And we're not sure how bad it's going to be in Texas. We do have some species that are sensitive to it, like the tricolored bat. But a lot of bats that live in Texas do not hibernate because of our relatively mild climate. So we're hoping that that might kind of give our bats an advantage. But also typically, you know, if you are going to see a large die-off from white nose syndrome, there's a little bit of a delay in the fungus being detected and really seeing that large die-off. So we're still kind of early here in Texas, but we are hopeful that this won't be too devastating to our bat populations here. So what are the potential treatments for this? People have looked at doing fungicides to kill the fungus, either treating bats or treating the cave environment, as well as fungi eating bacteria. So either there are some species of bacteria that are naturally found on the bodies of some bat species, as well as some other bacteria, like there's one that is sprayed on bananas to keep fungus from growing on bananas, that they've looked at treating bats with that. There's also been some research done with sanitizing UV light to kill the fungal cells. The thing that's really tricky about all of these is like the logistics of how you're going to apply this to millions and millions of bats, right? And there has been some discussion about potentially treating the caves, but caves are very sensitive, very intricate ecosystems that lots of other species rely on as well. So you're kind of, that's a very risky move to go into a cave and like spray the entire thing with fungicide, because you don't know what else in the cave you're going to be impacting. And you don't know, you know, if you change it too much, then it might not even be desirable to the bats anymore. So we don't really, you know, that's a big risk to take. There is some research being done looking at treating culverts that bats are known to roost in, to see if it's effective there. And then there's also work being done to see if a vaccine could potentially be developed. So in the state of Texas, bats are actually protected by state law. Texas was actually one of the earliest states to put laws in place to protect bats. So natural areas, bridges, and abandoned buildings are all considered protected roosts, which means it's illegal to disturb or destroy them. There are no chemicals that are that can be used on bats, and it's also important to use bat-friendly exclusion techniques if they are you know, somewhere where they should not be, and to only use those techniques when the bats do not have pups, so you don't risk stranding pups. So bats, you know, they're cool, but they're also really beneficial to us. Nationwide, bats save farmers $23 billion annually in reduced crop loss and also reduced pesticide use. And so that's less money that farmers either lose directly from losing their crops, or less money that they have to spend on pesticides. And that's also less pesticides that are getting put on our food. In Texas alone, the value is $1.4 billion of bats to the agriculture industry. Many bats will eat their weight in insects every single night. which is just really great if you don't want to be completely overwhelmed by bugs when you step outside. They also, bats worldwide pollinate over 500 plant species, and they're also important for seed dispersal. And they can be really beneficial for ecotourism as well. This is the scene, this picture here is near Congress Avenue Bridge. So you can see the bats flying out from the bridge. And, you know, sort of like Wall Drive in Houston, it's free to go and see the bats. It is not free to rent a swan boat or a kayak or go on, you know, a boat cruise to watch the bats emerge. And it's estimated that Congress Avenue Bridge brings about $10 million every year in tourism dollars to the city of Austin, which is really huge. So bats are important. What can we do to help them? Well, first and foremost, we need to protect their natural habitat. So that's forests, as well as caves and other things. We need to leave dead trees standing. They'll benefit bats and a lot of other species as well. When bats get into a house or some other building that is occupied, it's important to use bat-friendly exclusion techniques, which is basically you install structures where the bats can get in or can get out, but they cannot get back in. We can also build and install bat houses. There's lots of different ways to do it, and lots of different designs out there. Bat Conservation International is a bat focused organization, and they have lots of good information and instructions for how to build bat houses on their website. And then one other thing that we can do is support the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This is a bill that has passed the United States House and is rumored to come up for a vote in the Senate in the next month or so. It has strong bipartisan support. This bill would provide $1.3 billion for at-risk species, including bats nationwide, and over $50 million of that would go to Texas every year. So I just encourage y'all to look into that. And then finally, it's just important to spread the word and tell people about how cool bats are. And one way that we can do that is going to look at bat emergences. So Texas Parks and Wildlife actually has a list of bat watching sites on our website. It has details about each site, about like where to go and what you'll see and stuff like that. You'll see, unfortunately, none of them are really here in North Texas. We don't really have any caves, but it makes a really great weekend trip to go to Bracken Cave or Old Tunnel or Congress Avenue Bridge and check out the bats. If you're gonna do it, we're getting kind of towards the end of the season where you'll see really big emergences. So I would do it maybe in the next month or so, or wait until next year in around like May or so. August is a really good time for bat emergencies as well, because that's when the pups are starting to be old enough to fly out with their moms. So you'll see some pretty big emergencies there. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that y'all have. And I will turn my camera back on.
Okay, so in the chat, there's a question. It says, you mentioned red bats and pups being found on the ground. Since they are most other insectivorous bats cannot take off from the ground, could you please touch on the process members of the public should follow to get the bats or any exposed bat assistance?
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend trying to touch any bat that's on the ground. You don't want to handle it, if it is something, if it's in a obviously like dangerous situation or area, like there's fire ants or something like that. You know, you can maybe use gloves or something to like scoop it up with that you're not directly touching the animal. Just because anytime a bat's on the ground, there is a risk that it's sick. So we really want to try to avoid touching them. But in most cases, I would just leave it alone, like let it be, and it will kind of, you know, recover and be able to move on if it is going to recover.
Okay, next question. I have a bat house, but no bats have found it. What can I do to help bats come?
Yeah, so I get asked this question a lot. You know, bat houses are not like putting out a bird feeder. It's not like if you build it, they will come thing. They might show up, they might not. Most of the bat species that we have here in North Texas, or a lot of them anyway, are going to be tree roosters that don't use bat houses. We do have 3 species that might use a bat house, but if you've got the bat house up and they're not coming, that just might mean that the bats in your area aren't the type that are going to use the bat house. You want to make sure when you install a bat house that you want it to be ideally around 20 feet off the ground, because the bats drop down from it and they need some hang time to kind of swoop up to get their, you know, get some air underneath their wings and get going. You also need to put it somewhere where it will get a lot of sunlight, because again, bats don't like to be cold, so it needs as much sun as possible. And I recommend checking out Bat Conservation International. The website's right there, batcon.org. They have a whole section on bat houses and kind of tips and tricks for attracting them. But even if you do everything right, it doesn't necessarily mean that bats will come. If you do everything right, it increases your chances of bats coming, but there's no guarantee that they will.
Okay, the next question, is there an update on the research on benefits of vampire bat saliva?
I don't know. There might be, but I'm not sure.
Okay, next question, where have a lot of bats been found?
In general, or I mean, I guess specific to North Texas, there's not any really great area that I know of to like go and see an emergence. Sometimes they're in parking garages in our downtown areas, but a lot of times they'll be excluded from that area. So there's not, you know, they're here. They're definitely around. If you're interested in like trying to, I guess, find bats in your area, there's this little device that you can buy. It hooks into your phone. I'll hang that up closer. It's called an echometer, and this is an acoustic monitor. And it picks up on those vocalizations, those high pitch, the echolocation, as well as the just sounds that bats make. And it will detect it on your phone. And so that can be kind of fun if you're really interested in bats. If you want to go around at night, you can walk around your neighborhood with this and see what types of bats might be flying around.
Next question, does echolocation ability correlate with ear size?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's other things going into it as well, like stuff inside the bat's head. So echolocation can help, or having big ears can certainly help your hearing, but even bats that have small ears or almost no ears can echolocate. So that's not the only factor.
Do bats travel in swarms?
So the only time that you would see them in a swarm would be when they're emerging for the night to go feed. So when they're coming out of that cave or bat house or whatever, like Bracken Cave, for example, they'll start coming out and they kind of fly in a circle, like it looks like a tornado of bats kind of coming out of the cave entrance for a little while. So they'll kind of fly like that, and then they'll start taking off. And then when they go out to forage, they don't remain in a group. They forage as individuals.
And there's just a couple comments. There's a lot of bats in the White Rock Lake area. And another question is, how did bats get so cute?
I don't know how they got that cute. But aren't we lucky that they are?
Right. Other than that, there's no more questions. What are bats' natural enemies?
Oh, okay. So if you do go and see like a big emergence near a cave, one of the morbidly fascinating things that you will see, like Bracken Cave, for example, on the rocks near at the outside of the cave, there's snakes that hang out and hope for a bat to get close enough to them for them to grab them. And then there's also hawks that wait for the bats to come out. So those are some of the natural predators of bats. Bat, I would assume that the bat was rabid, just like if you were bit by a raccoon or a dog or something like that.
Are wind turbine operators working to decrease bat kills?
Ooh, so this is a great question. I didn't have time to talk about this in my presentation, but so wind turbines, well, this is a great renewable energy source. 1 second, then take a drink. They have been known to cause mortality in both bats and birds from getting hit by the blades or from that kind of change in pressure that happens as the wind from the wind that's generated. And so the answer is yes, they are working with it. There has been research, there's a couple of different research projects going on looking at what can we do to kind of warn bats about these to stay away from the wind turbines. So there are some professors at TCU that are working on this, as well as there was a project at Texas State. So one of the things that they found is that they think that maybe the folks at TCU think that there might be, so there might be condensation on the surface of the wind turbine. And the bat picks that up with its echolocation and thinks that it's a water source, so the bats are actually attracted to it. So that's one thing, is maybe there's a different way to texturize these. And then at Texas State, they did research where they put speakers on the wind turbines that played a certain sound that deterred the bats. And they actually found that that was effective. And they partnered with the wind energy companies to do that research as well. So it is a problem, but I think it's a problem that we're going to figure out how to reduce mortality from wind turbines.
And this is, how much do bats consume or eat in a year?
A lot. So let's see. A lot of bats there's a lot of different bat species that double their body weight every single night in the bugs. So that's a lot. And I think, what was it? At Bracken Cave alone is 250 tons every single night. So I don't know what that translates to for a year, but that's a whole lot of bugs.
Is there an economic use for guano?
Yes, there is. It can be used as a fertilizer, and there's some other various products and uses for guano. So bat poop is very useful.
Can bats eat a bullfrog?
There are some bat species that do eat frogs. I don't think, bullfrogs are pretty large. And the species of bats that eat frogs, I don't think overlap with the bullfrog's range. We don't have any of those here in North America, so probably not.
Isn't guano poisonous?
Well, I wouldn't eat it. I wouldn't eat guano. And yes, so like the gas, like if you go into a cave, the gases that are in that cave that has the bats can be very toxic to you, but there are ways to mine guano and turn it into useful products.
I guess if there's no further questions, thank you, Rachel, for presenting natural bats of North Texas. Thank you all, everyone who came out and spent their Saturday morning with us, learning about bats of North Texas. Guess that'll be all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.